The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty streets of Redemption Creek as Eleanor Hartford stood outside the general store, her single leather trunk at her feet. She wore her finest traveling dress, a deep burgundy with black trim, though dust already clung to its hem. Her hands trembled as she clutched a one-way ticket to Boston, the paper crumpled from nervous fingers. "Stage leaves in 10 minutes, Miss Hartford," called out the driver, a grizzled man named Pete who'd made this route 100 times before. Eleanor nodded, unable to speak. Her eyes scanned the town one last time, the saloon where she'd nursed wounded soldiers during the war, the schoolhouse where she'd taught children to read, the church where her parents were buried. 5 years she'd spent building a life here, and now she was leaving it all behind. Her aunt's letter had been clear: come to Boston, marry the banker Mr. Ashford had chosen for her, and live the proper life a woman of her station deserved. The ranch was failing, debts were mounting, and staying meant poverty. Leaving meant security. But it also meant abandoning her heart. Jake Morrison had been nothing but kind to her since the day she'd arrived in Redemption Creek. The quiet cowboy with sun-weathered skin and honest gray eyes had helped her repair her fence, brought her firewood during harsh winters, and sat with her on the porch sharing stories until the stars filled the sky. She'd fallen in love with his gentle strength, his integrity, his dreams of building something lasting in this wild land. Yet Jake had never spoken of love. He'd never asked her to stay. Perhaps he'd never felt the same way she did, and she was just a neighbor to him, nothing more. "All aboard!" Pete shouted. Eleanor lifted her trunk, her heart breaking with each step toward the stagecoach. Other passengers were already settling in, a merchant, a young family, a preacher. She placed her foot on the step, ready to climb inside and close this chapter of her life forever. Then she heard it, the thunder of hoofbeats approaching fast. "Wait," a voice called out, rough and desperate. "Stop that stage." Eleanor spun around, her breath catching. Jake Morrison galloped down Main Street on his chestnut mare, his hat flying off as he rode. He pulled the horse to a sliding stop, dust billowing around them. For a moment, time seemed suspended. Their eyes met, and Eleanor saw something in his gaze she'd never allowed herself to hope for, pure, undeniable fear of losing her. Jake dismounted in one fluid motion, his boots hitting the ground hard. He stood there, chest heaving, looking at her with an intensity that made her knees weak. "Eleanor," he said, his voice carrying across the silent street. The entire town had stopped to watch. "Don't get on that stage." Eleanor's heart hammered against her ribs. "Jake, I have to go. There's nothing for me here." "Nothing?" Jake stepped closer, his weathered hands clenched at his sides. "Is that really what you think?" She looked away, unable to bear the intensity in his eyes. "The ranch is failing. I can't survive another winter alone. My aunt has arranged everything." "I don't care what your aunt arranged," Jake interrupted, his voice rougher than she'd ever heard it. "I care about what you want. What your heart wants." "My heart doesn't pay debts, Jake." Eleanor's voice cracked. "It doesn't put food on the table or keep the wolves from the door. I have to be practical." "Then be practical about this." Jake closed the distance between them, standing so close she could see the flecks of blue in his gray eyes. "I've been a coward, Eleanor. I've watched you struggle, helped where you'd let me, but never said the words that mattered. I told myself I had nothing to offer you, just a small ranch, hard work, and an uncertain future. I thought you deserved better than a simple cowboy who smells like cattle and has dirt under his fingernails." "Jake. Let me finish, please." He took a shaky breath. "But watching you stand there, about to leave forever, made me realize something. I'd rather risk everything, my pride, my heart, everything, than let you go without knowing the truth. I love you, Eleanor Hartford. I've loved you since the day you threatened that cattle rustler with a broom and sent him running. I've loved you through every sunrise we've shared, every conversation on your porch, every moment I was blessed enough to be near you. Tears streamed down Eleanor's face. Why didn't you tell me before? Because I'm a fool, Jake said simply. Because I was afraid. But I'm more afraid of a life without you in it than I am of rejection. The stage driver cleared his throat. Miss, we really need to. Give us a moment, Pete, Jake said, never taking his eyes off Eleanor. Please. He reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a small velvet box, worn at the edges. This was my mother's ring. I've been carrying it for 6 months, trying to find the courage to ask you. I know I should have a grand speech prepared, but all I have is the truth. Stay with me, Eleanor. Marry me. We'll save your ranch together, merge it with mine. We'll work side by side, build something real, raise a family if you'll have me. It won't be easy, and it won't be fancy like Boston, but I promise you this, you will be loved every single day for the rest of your life. Eleanor looked at the ring, a simple gold band with a small sapphire, then at the Stagecoach, then back at Jake's earnest, hopeful face. Her whole body shook with the magnitude of the decision. I love you too, she whispered. I've loved you for so long, Jake. But I'm scared. What if we fail? What if? Then we fail together, Jake said firmly. But we won't. Not if we're side by side. He opened the ring box, his hand surprisingly steady now. Eleanor Hartford, will you stay? Will you be my wife? The entire town of Redemption Creek seemed to hold its breath. Widow Jenkins clutched her basket tighter. The blacksmith paused mid-hammer. Even the horses stood still, as if sensing the weight of the moment. Eleanor looked at the ring, then at Jake's face, so honest, so full of hope and fear intertwined. Every practical bone in her body screamed about the risks. Boston meant security, social standing, an easy life with servants and fine clothes. Here, she'd face droughts, harsh winters, backbreaking work, and uncertainty. But Boston also meant marrying a man she didn't love, spending her days in drawing rooms discussing needlepoint, slowly suffocating under the weight of propriety and emptiness. Here, she'd have Jake, his laughter, his strength, his unwavering presence beside her through whatever storms came. Eleanor began, her voice barely audible. Jake's face showed he was bracing for heartbreak, but he stood tall, giving her the space to choose freely. She thought of her parents, buried on the hill overlooking her small ranch. They'd come west seeking freedom and possibility. They'd taught her that courage meant betting on what mattered most, not what was easiest. Her mother had always said, choose love when it's real, Ellie. Everything else can be figured out. Eleanor looked down at her crumpled ticket to Boston, then deliberately let it fall from her fingers. The paper fluttered to the dust at her feet. Yes, she said, her voice growing stronger. Yes, Jake Morrison, I'll stay. I'll marry you. The joy that flooded Jake's face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. He slipped the ring onto her finger with trembling hands, then pulled her into his arms, holding her like she was the most precious thing in the world. The town erupted in cheers. Pete the stage driver grinned and tipped his hat. Well, I'll be damned. Best love story I've seen in 30 years of driving this route. Widow Jenkins dabbed at her eyes. The blacksmith hooped and rang his hammer against his anvil. Children clapped and danced while their parents smiled knowingly. Jake pulled back just enough to look at Eleanor's face. I promise you won't regret this. I already don't, Eleanor said, touching his weathered cheek. This is where I belong. With you. In this wild, beautiful, impossible place we call home. We'll make it work, Jake said firmly. Your ranch and mine, we'll combine the herds, share the work. I've got some money saved. We can hire a hand or two, maybe expand to that creek valley you've had your eye on. It won't be overnight, but we'll build something strong. Eleanor laughed through her tears. Listen to us, planning our empire before we've even had our first kiss as an engaged couple. Jake's eyes lit with mischief. Well, we should probably fix that. He cupped her face in his calloused hands and kissed her there in the middle of Main Street, with the whole town watching and the morning sun blessing them with golden light. It was a kiss that tasted of dust and hope and promises kept. A kiss that felt like coming home. When they finally broke apart, both breathless and grinning, Eleanor noticed her trunk still sitting by the stagecoach. "You'll need to get your things," Jake said. "Actually," Eleanor smiled, "everything I truly need is right here." 3 months later, Eleanor stood in the same spot on Main Street, but everything had changed. The church bells rang out across Redemption Creek, celebrating the wedding of Jake Morrison and Eleanor Hartford. She wore a dress of cream lace, simple but beautiful, and carried wildflowers from the meadow where Jake had first told her about his dreams of expanding his ranch. The ceremony had been perfect. Reverend Thomas spoke of faith and courage. Jake's hands shook when he slipped the wedding band next to his mother's ring. Eleanor's voice was clear and certain when she said, "I do." When Jake kissed her as his wife, the whole town cheered just as loudly as they had that morning by the stagecoach. Now, at the reception in the town hall, Eleanor watched her new husband laugh with the ranch hands who'd become their friends. The past 3 months had been a whirlwind of activity. True to his word, Jake had helped merge their ranches. They'd worked side by side from dawn until dusk, mending fences, moving cattle, and planning their future. The work was hard, harder than Eleanor had imagined, but she'd never been happier. There was something deeply satisfying about building a life with her own hands, about seeing the direct results of her labor, about falling into bed exhausted beside the man she loved and waking up to do it all again. "May I have this dance, Mrs. Morrison?" Jake appeared at her elbow, extending his hand with exaggerated formality. "Mrs. Morrison." Eleanor's heart still skipped at hearing it. "You may, Mr. Morrison." As they swayed to the fiddle's melody, Jake pulled her close. "Any regrets?" he whispered in her ear. "Not a single one," Eleanor answered honestly. "Though I imagine my aunt in Boston is still scandalized by the telegram I sent her." Jake chuckled. "What did it say again?" "Dear Aunt Margaret, have married a cowboy. Deliriously happy. Don't expect me for tea. Love, Eleanor." Short and sweet, Jake grinned. "I like it. She'll survive the disappointment," Eleanor said. "Besides, she has 3 other nieces to marry off to boring bankers. Thank God you chose the interesting cowboy instead." "Interesting is one word for it," Eleanor teased, then grew serious. "Jake, I want you to know something. That day at the stagecoach, when you asked me to stay, you didn't just save me from a loveless marriage. You saved me from a loveless life. You gave me a future I actually want to live." Jake's eyes glistened. "You gave me the same, Eleanor. I was going through the motions before you, working, surviving, but not really living. You brought color and meaning and joy to everything. You made me brave enough to risk my heart." "We made each other brave," Eleanor corrected. The fiddle music swelled, and other couples joined them on the makeshift dance floor. Eleanor caught sight of Widow Jenkins dancing with the blacksmith, both grinning like young fools in love. She saw the preacher's wife teaching a group of children a dance step, their laughter ringing out. She saw her friends and neighbors celebrating not just a wedding, but the triumph of choosing courage over comfort, love over security, possibility over certainty. As the sun set over Redemption Creek, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, Jake whispered, "Forever starts now, Mrs. Morrison." Eleanor kissed him softly, tasting their shared future, full of hard work and tender moments, challenges and triumphs, setbacks and victories, but most of all, full of love. "Forever started the moment you stopped that stagecoach," she whispered back. "Everything else is just the adventure of living it." And they did, together, for all their days.